Hi, I'm Ashley Adamson, and I wanted to talk to you about perceiving, being a perception of seeing yourself as trans and how that affects your experience in being authentically in your own feeling of your gender. This is, it's kind of a complex topic because we can say that we are trans, like how do you identify? And then when you answer that question of how do you identify, how does that perception of your identity affect your perception of yourself? And I want to draw that distinction or that line between your identity and yourself. So the self is the ever-present version of you that exists. Hello, water. I'm just going to move you over there. And it's the thing, it's the entity, it's the being of you that exists in your body and exists just everywhere. It's the self, it's you, it's inherently you. However, there is an identity, which is this aspect to how you have solidified an idea, and this is important, so listen closely, an idea of who the self is. The reason why this is important is because the idea of who the self is not the self. The self is the present version of you. It's the one that is existing and experiencing reality. The identity is the written down, I'm a trans woman, I'm a trans man, I'm non-binary. It's the written part, it's the in your head. I don't know if I'm explaining this right. Is this making sense so far? There's a difference between the actual self and the ego. This is another way of saying it. The ego is the idea, it's the thing that we become attached to, and it's the thing that isn't necessarily who we are, but it's a great way of encapsulating and expressing and creating all of these categorizations of who we are. So when I say to you, I'm a trans woman and my name is Ashley, I have two labels there. I have being a trans woman and I have Ashley, and those two things are encoded into my experience of my identity. And there's other things too, like I'm mixed race. I originally come from England and I grew up in California, and I'm a designer and I'm a coach and I'm a writer and a speaker. All of those things, they come packaged together into an identity. And that identity is something that I hold close to my heart. Like, how is your identity? How do you define who you are? And how does that affect your expression and experience of yourself? Most of the time, this is fine because the way that we experience the world and the way that we've constructed our identity is a way of figuring out who we are and saying this is right and that's right, right? Like that's how you've kind of, to say it very bland, very simply, you've gone through the world and you've figured out what feels right, right? And that's how we kind of assemble. And we do this throughout our life, but mostly once we kind of hit the age of 12 and we start to move through puberty and we start to move through all of these dimensions of figuring out how to carve our space in the world and who we are, we construct this identity. Now, transitioning and being trans is one of those things where you have to reconfigure the whole identity part, because gender is such a foundational aspect to our culture and society and how we perceive who a person is and how to interact with them. And so when you change your gender, you change how you interact with yourself, how you see yourself, and how you give yourself permission. Have you transitioned? Are you transgender? Like, in changing your gender, how have you changed how you act towards yourself? How have you changed your expectations of yourself? And how have you changed what you allow yourself to do? And what do you do now? For hopefully most of you that have transitioned, or acknowledged at least that you're transgender, haven't you given yourself more permission to feel better about yourself? Because you are now enabling yourself to take the actions that feel inherently right in your heart, right? Like, what's one small thing that is a little gift that you gave yourself once you acknowledged that you were transgender? What was that one small thing? For me, it was like putting on dresses and wearing makeup and feeling like I could look pretty. Like, that was such an amazing thing. And this is all really good. This is great. This is all the identity construction, which is fantastic. But here is the little thing that I want to share with you that is the big thing. It's the labeling of the self and how that can actually restrict us. Now, I have a story to tell you. So last week, I put on makeup, and I think it was last episode actually. This is recorded later, but last week I put an episode out talking about the unknown, and I was wearing makeup, and I went out dancing, and I said, okay, I'm stepping into the unknown. We'll see what happens, right? Well, I stepped into the unknown, and I ended up meeting someone who was interested in me and attracted to me, and I was attracted to them, and they didn't know that I was trans, and they asked for my number. So I said, great, like, this is a good start. Like, I never get the opportunity to date people without outing myself to start with. So let me experiment with this. And last night we had a second date, and he invited me over, he made me dinner, and we kissed on his bed, and it was delightful. And as he was kissing and touching me, I could feel his perception and my perception intertwining in a way where I got to experience myself as perceived as a cis woman, and that my experience and perception of myself, seeing myself just as a woman without the trans label, gave me permission to experience and see myself in my femininity as a woman. And that's when I realized my perception of seeing myself as trans and a trans woman actually limits my own expression and acceptance of my experience. Because when I label myself as a trans person and as a trans woman, I don't allow myself some of the layers of my own femininity that already exist to be expressed and acknowledged and accepted. Because I don't believe that somewhere deep down there's a part of me, and I don't want to say I like the whole I, but there's a little I, like a little piece within me that doesn't believe that it's okay for me to wholeheartedly believe and engage with myself just as a woman. Now, I've heard this from very late stage transition people who have transitioned for 10 or 15 years. They eventually get to that part where they're like, oh, I'm a woman, that's it. And I've been 3 years on hormones as a woman. And this stage is the thing that I'm starting to see. And I want to share this with you because I want you to think about where your trans identity might be holding you back in just embracing what is innately within you. You've had those moments, right, where there are gender euphoria and you feel this rush, this feeling within you that feels so right and feels really good. But then that comes with this second kind of pushback of, is this okay for me to experience? And even if you've gotten past that part to say, yeah, this is okay, there is something potentially there that limits what you can experience because you say, well, I'm not beautiful enough, I'm not lovable enough, I'm not going to be accepted, it's not fully safe to do this. There's something potentially in there that can step in the way of allowing the ocean or the river of your gender euphoria and your gender experience to be reduced, to reduce the flow, to reduce that energy. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you get what I'm saying? I would like you to kind of think about this because this is so important as we collectively speak about being trans and having this trans identity within the community and outside, that by labeling ourselves as trans, it creates a convenience for us to express a very complex topic in a very succinct way, but it also creates limitations in our own perception of what we can be, as well as tells other people limitations of how they can perceive us. Because the trans narrative, let's face it, it's a kind of loaded narrative where there's a lot of sadder stories around that. Like, I'm born in the wrong identity, I face a lot of adversity, I don't have access to the right health care, and I have trouble feeling validated, and like it's really hard to get work, and blah, blah, blah. Like, there's all these things in there that are really difficult and totally true about the trans experience that just makes it really hard. But there's also these other aspects where we can be successful, we can be leaders, we can be smart, we can be articulate, we can find ways in which to be like not just financially sustainable, but financially rich. And I think like this is just kind of like all part of this package of the labeling of the trans and the identity versus who you actually are. Like, are you really your identity, or are you something more than that? You're more than that. And this is kind of like something that I've talked about a little bit called transcending the trans narrative, going beyond what is the perception of what trans is. And maybe that's another topic, but I wanted to kind of share this insight with you to get you to think a little bit about yourself and how you perceive yourself. And maybe it's not even just being trans. Maybe it's just saying, I'm this or I'm that. You know, like when you've gone through this transition, haven't you found that your labeling of yourself has prevented or kind of held you in a stasis that holds you back from your own personal transformation, right? Thanks for joining me today. If you would like to support me, buy me a cup of coffee or join my weekly Q&A, which is happening this week, and I'll have a guided meditation the following week, then join my Patreon. I have a Patreon down below, and I really appreciate anyone that supports. I love connecting with all of you, having conversations, and just kind of like expanding that community and connection. Thanks for joining me today. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.